Good evening from New Zealand. It's about 9 o'clock, so yeah, I'm just off for dinner after this as well. So the journey into new orchard systems, and there was a brief note in there about future orchard systems. And we need to think about orchard systems as not what we know now and not what we think about that we're comfortable with right now, because every time we plant a tree, we're planting with the belief that it's going to be there for another 20 years, maybe even 30 years. So we have to think about what we need to do looking forward. New Zealand orchard systems are pretty varied. Probably typically we think about 3.5, 1.2 metre spacings, a spindle type tree with a little bit of width in it. But there's a whole range of trees in New Zealand. There's not one system that we say, this is where we're going to be. I remember back about 10 years ago in Chile, we had a symposium in Chile, and we had Terence Robinson and Tom Orville and Kurt Wirth was there from Italy, and we're all debating it. And one of the problems with that, I felt, was we all agreed exactly where we were going. It was 3x1. And it was a spindle tree. No matter where we were coming from, there was that one sense of this is what the system was going to be. And as times evolve, we keep thinking about what's next. And, you know, in New Zealand, we talk about FOPs, and there's some small commercial planting starting to build. There's some experience starting to happening in a commercial sense. It's just not in that trial orchard at 1.5 and 2 metre spacings. We're starting to get into a commercial reality, 2.2, 2.5 metre spacings, but the plantings are still relatively small. We start moving into two-dimensional orchards, and I'll go into it in more detail from me. You know, we've had 15, 16 years experience of that and doing pretty well, and we're talking about formal two-dimensional systems, vertical systems, relatively simple in their approach. And then within a branch of all of that two-dimensional systems, there's also a number of growers, not that many, but are pushing into the V system because they're sort of awed and captured by the chance of getting maximum light interception and large yields. So when it comes down, you know, you travel the world, you look at all these systems, you travel your region, you see differences, but no matter, you know, it's probably, if you went, you get growers together, and if it's not about pruning, we can actually stand in an orchard and talk about pruning for 3 days and still argue and debate, but we love it because, you know, you're making a real difference. And the other one is about orchard systems. You know, you can just debate that till you know, the cows come home. It's just something that, you know, everyone's got an opinion on, but at the end of the day, the best orchard system is the one that the orchard manager believes in. And for that South African term, I was looking at IMPI last week back home, and there was this tab that came up and it said jockey. And I turned to my technician, I'm going, what is a jockey? You know, and it's just, you know, and then I asked at dinner last night, you know, it's the one, I know they ride a horse, I understand that. Yeah, but they're the ones that make it happen. So when we're talking about orchard systems, it has to be the jockey that believes it, not me, not the management team, not the accountant, not the guy who's writing the spreadsheet up. It has to be the jockey that believes in it. Otherwise, it's going to be another boneyard, another mess in the corner that we have to recover from. So just a little bit about the context from my point of view in New Zealand, just to sort of put it in reality. You know, we have, you know, really high-priced land. Relatively speaking, we have high-priced labour. Relatively at the moment, the supply of labour is pretty good, but it's still high-priced. Our orchards are getting bigger, and our jockeys are going to have to manage more land, more people under them, and so that ability to manage at scale is changing. You know, long gone are the days where you knew the name of every tree and you could just walk out there and you knew that's the one I pruned last year and so on. In the other context from New Zealand, we are 95% export. You know, we are focused on a market 4 to 6 weeks away, and so we have to have high quality fruit. So when we talk about orchard systems, I think with all of the debate, the consensus generally is moving forward, looking into the future. We need an orchard that is, another acronym, is a SNAP orchard. We need it to be simple. We need it to be, to create focus and be objective. We need it to be narrow, so we get better light interception, and there's potential for mechanisation. Accessibility, when you talk about using platforms or managing people, you don't want a tree that's more than an arm length in depth, because I've got to get moving around the tree, I've got to move into the tree. So we need to think about that in terms of our labour efficiency. And we have to look at productivity. We need benchmarks that are talking about good yields, and a lot of people get carried away with, I want a system that does 100 tonnes, 120 tonnes, 140, and you know, in PFR start talking about 180 tonnes with FOPs at some point. But realistically, when we look at internal rates of return and we pencil things out, it's really important to get a production system that actually gets an early yield. We're spending a lot of money. We can't wait till year 10 to get this maximum magical yield. We need good early production in our systems to create that. And we need targeted fruit. The fruit that's really going to pay the money. We heard the peer presentations yesterday, and the essence of all of that was those upper quartile, upper third growers, they were focused on the fruit that was making the money that generated the difference in their return. The other thing I've added to this whole concept of snap canopies really is now they're snappy. And what I mean by snappy is they need to be enduring. Every orchard, we should be expecting that it's going to last 20, 25 years. We can graft these. We need to think about what rootstock is going to deliver what we need, not today, but in 10 years' time. And it's going to survive what we need to do. And we need to think about all of those aspects to create the orchard that's going to still be there standing, because sometimes, you know, the rootstock and the structure and the hail net might survive 2 or 3 different scions. You know, it's just not a one-crop wonder and then we replace it, you know, and move on. So in my reality, you know, we move from 3-dimensional trees to 2-dimensional trees. And I don't apologise for that. This is where I've come to, and we need to absolutely think like that in 2-dimensional canopies. There was a couple of images someone used maybe this morning or yesterday from the Back to the Future. No, it was this morning, from Back to the Future. Here's another one, you know. Are we really going backwards or are we going forwards in this whole discussion around canopy types? And Terence Robinson talked about in one of his webinars a wee while ago, is 2D just a sidestep, or is it actually, you know, something we need to strive for? So we have lots of options when we talk about two-dimension. We have, you know, horizontal formal systems, which is where I'll focus on, and it's where I really believe we have advantages. We can have vertical systems which are very narrow and very close, multi-stem options, whether that's in a FOPS context or just multi-stem grafted. You know, and they look relatively high dense, but they're very narrow. We're talking, you know, in a lot of the systems I work with now are only 20 or 30 centimetres in depth on one side of the canopy. So then they can be informal or formal, and so there's for me, there's a big debate about that. There's a cost in being formal because you have to train branches. Informal, we're used to having an axe tree which is relatively random in its branches and its architecture, and we can let the branches do what they want. And then in another sense, being formal, we have to manipulate the tree, but we create something. Back in 2005, I was at an IFTA conference in Wenatchee, and Dave Allen and I used to run off to a cafe, have a bit of Mexican food, and then start designing our orchards on napkins. And after one of those discussions, he presented at the next conference, this is the orchard I'm developing. And one of the things he said, you know, we spend more time debating the density rather than the tree growth and the tree form when we're looking forward. And we need to think about that. We spend more time looking at the land than we do about what we want that tree to look like in 3 to 5 years' time. So 2D formal is my reality, because it's where I think we create a very systematic, simple approach to what we're trying to achieve. And it's very narrow, and you can see from this is about what age would this one be? That canopy's about 11 years old, raw gala. Still only mid-season in the photo looking down the row, so we're talking about a maximum 35, 40 centimetres at max through the canopy. Sorry? Sure. And when we talk about these systems, we talk about the ability to, have really good light transmission. We get light moving through the orchard, and I'll talk about this in my next talk. I'm really lucky I get 2 shots at this. So I'll talk about that a little bit later. With formal systems, I think we manage windows really well, and windows through a canopy are really important for light transmission to the whole part of the canopy. If you've got a random system, you've got to try and create some rules about the density of wood you're looking to achieve. In these vertical systems, it's very easy when you're pushing yield to try and start closing the canopy in, but with a formal system, that window is almost locked in. And there's a range of different ways you can manage that window as well, and sometimes that involves a little bit of leaf blowing and other things. Another aspect, we've amended some old plantings at times, dense, thick canopies, and we've created windows within that and created a formal structure, and sort of it's almost a hybrid system. With narrow systems, we can look at mechanical situations. So on the left, that's the canopy, no fruit. We apply a little bit of mechanical pruning, all of a sudden the fruit appears and colours up towards harvest. So other technologies become really possible. Leaf blowing, for example, is gaining a lot of flavour, and it's really impacting on harvest management, good effective. And with a really narrow canopy, we can leaf blow really, really effectively, in a few situations very excessively. So we have to back that off compared to where we're using leaf blowing in 3-dimensional canopies. I'm not sure where you fit in the discussion around platforms, but in narrow canopies, platforms really work, and we can create worker efficiency. And through COVID, I think in that period, just after COVID, we had never seen the amount of platforms bought in that year. I think in that year there was more platforms bought than the previous 5 or 6 years in New Zealand, and the growth in that whole understanding. We've got to think about labour efficiency in terms of what's the reality of labour efficiencies. Do we see platforms, or do we see ladders continuing in our orchards? So if we think about labour profiles and this accessibility and changing labour, we have to think about, what happens with our labour profile, and how can we impact that? And that's a typical multi-variety labour profile, but more and more in New Zealand, we're seeking these opportunities where a single variety, we're planting 1 or 2 varieties, and we have really peak demands on our labour. Really peak demands. And so you're moving from 1 person per hectare to 3 people maximum per hectare in our orchards. So massive changes, and if we can get harvest efficiency, which is our biggest labour peak, out of these new systems, we're able to capture those opportunities. The other thing, I was lucky enough to go to base camp with my wife and my youngest son a few years ago, our first track at altitude training. If we think about, the ladder, and we've got a couple of thousand trees to the hectare, and we're going up 1.5 metres every time we go at harvest time, we're climbing from base camp to Everest in the orchard at harvest. If you counted the time you went on the ladder at thinning, and you're probably actually going in twice over a thinning in a repeated sense, you're going from sea level to the top of Everest through a season for 1 hectare. That was my youngest son, was base camp. My middle son, he's involved in marine science and everything else, so he was in Alaska studying humpbacks. And so one of the things they did, they talked about the biomass of, and did condition checking on whales in Alaska. But if we thought about, we're asking, our pickers, 1 bin is roughly 400 kilos. We're asking our pickers to do 4 bins a day. So that's 1,600 kilos. Over 5 days, that's 8 tonnes. 12 weeks, that's 100 tonnes. We're shifting in the orchard manually It's a little more than the weight of a southern right whale in terms of shifting that. It's a physical process. I'll just skip through, I need to catch up. So picker efficiency gains, we're definitely seeing those in our two-dimensional orchards. The placement of the fruit and the accessibility. You know, when you ask the picker, when they leave the land and the ground and step on the ladder, they know the fruit they're going to pick. They're not walking up the ladder, moving into the canopy and trying to work out which apple it is. They're already making the choice because they can see the fruit really, really simply. Technology in this whole accessibility space is coming, and we've seen a number of presentations this morning, but it's really about the labour piece. If we focus on making our canopies efficient for labour, they will then be appropriate for digitising and mechanisation and using future tools. Productive, if we look at three-dimensional trees, we're going two-dimensional tree, a slender spindle, a two-dimensional tree, and then we go into some sort of FOP system, or we go into a V system. My metrics now are 20 kilometres to 42 kilometres of fruiting wood per hectare. And when we look at those in a comparison between a vertical and a V system, we can produce 2.7 kilos on average per metre, which gives us 90 to 110 tonnes in those systems. Where are we currently sitting with our performance this year? I think we've just maxed out over 135 tonnes on some V systems on large fruited varieties, and our two-dimensional systems, there's examples just approaching 100 tonnes this year. And in terms of that productivity piece, we need to think about, you know, these maximum yields are achievable, but one of the stumbling points in a new system is how we get it up to speed quickly when we're learning a new system. And we're only just now getting to that point where we're confident of getting close to that benchmark that I talk about in terms of we need 200 tonnes accumulated in the first 5 years. We skip on to enduring, you know, this next piece. Every orchard you plant, you need to be thinking about it's going to stand up, it's going to have hail net on, so why not think about it as being something that's got the capability of probably having a cycle of 2, maybe 3 varieties. There's no reason, as long as I prepare that orchard really, really well. And if I'm planting an orchard today at 4.5 metres, is that really going to be the orchard I want in 15 years' time? It might be if I put it in a V, but that's a question. But I think we need to think about this whole structure as lasting 30 years, and the decision we make today needs to take us there. So rootstocks, which rootstock? Do we talk about disease management? You know, these diseases aren't here yet, or they're just having an impact. The rootstock choice will have an impact in terms of survivability in the future. So then just recapping, you know, I think it's relatively simple. You know, we talk about this orchard being able to be broken down into simple objective rules. We need a narrow orchard for light management and high quality production. Accessibility is about labour efficiency and mechanisation. The productivity piece, I think we're getting there, and this thing about understanding an enduring orchard, something that's going to last well into the next generation. Thanks.